So this is the reading of the preface. Although a tribunal has existed for more than 300 years in Spain, invested with the power of prosecuting heretics, no correct history of its origin, establishment, and progress has been written. Writers of many countries have spoken of inquisitions established in different parts of the world where the Roman Catholic faith is the religion of the state, and yet not one is worthy of confidence. The work of M. Lavelle, entitled The History of the Inquisitions of Italy, Spain, and Portugal, and published in 1809, has only added to the historical errors of the authors who preceded him. The Spanish and Portuguese writers on the same subject deserve no higher credit and have not detailed with accuracy the circumstances which led to the establishment of this dreadful tribunal. These writers even differ in their statements of the period of its origin and place it between the years 1477 and 1484. One affirms with confidence that the latter date is the true one, because in that year the regulations of the tribunal were enacted. Another decides that it was originated in 1483, because in that year Thomas Torquemada was appointed Inquisitor General by the Pope. The Inquisition of Spain was not a new tribunal created by Ferdinand and Isabella, the Queen of Castile, but only a reform and extension of the ancient tribunal which had existed from the 13th century. No one could write a complete and authentic history of the Inquisition who was not either an inquisitor or a secretary of the Holy Office. Persons holding only these situations could be permitted to make memoranda of papal bulls, the ordinances of sovereigns, and decisions of the courts of the Supreme, of the originals of the preliminary processes for suspicion of heresy, or extracts of those which have been deposited in the archives. Being myself the secretary of the Inquisition at Madrid during the years 1789, 1790, and 1791, I have the firmest confidence in my being able to give the world a true code of the secret laws by which the interior of the Inquisition was governed. Of those laws which were veiled by mystery from all mankind, excepting those men to whom the knowledge of their political import was exclusively reserved. A firm conviction, from knowing the deep objects of this tribunal, that it was vicious in principle, in its constitution, and in its laws, notwithstanding all that has been said in its support, induced me to avail myself to the advantage of my situation afforded to me, the Peninsular Wars, and to collect every document I could procure relative to its history. My perseverance has been crowned with success far beyond my hopes, for in addition to an abundance of materials, obtained with labor and expense, consisting of unpublished manuscripts and papers, mentioned in the inventories of deceased inquisitors and other offices of the Inquisition in 1809, 1810, and 1811, when the Inquisition in Spain was suppressed. All the archives were placed at my disposal. And from 1809 into 1812 I collected everything that appeared to me to be of consequence in the registers of the Council of the Inquisition and in the provincial tribunals for the purpose of compiling this history. A little bit of history of what he's talking about. So Spain and France were friends. They were picking on Portugal. Spain was a thoroughfare for France. France decided, oh, hey, we think it would be better if we just occupied Spain. Spain objected and said, like, fuck you do. And there was bloody battles. There was lots of fighting, killing, death. There were people who sided with France because in the French they saw less bloody dictatorship than the Spanish Inquisition. There were people who sided with Spain because they were Spanish, and just the history of Europe is this is your team. You go your team no matter what. You ride or die. And even if Spain had been enacting a cruel, mindless genocide upon its own people for the past, few centuries, it was still Spain, ride or die, and these fucking French people aren't going to, to rule us. the author preferred the French people. So when Napoleon came into Spain and all hell broke loose and everybody started fighting, Dr. Juan Antonio Llorente, he took advantage of that and basically raided the archives. Boxes and boxes of files he took from the basements of the Inquisition in Madrid. And then he went to France, or ran to France, as it were. And he created this because in his heart he had seen some of the most gruesome horrors, and it's not always the person who perpetuates the crimes, in my opinion, because in my opinion sometimes those people are so far gone, they have to shield their minds so much from the cruelties that they do, maybe if it's just for their job or whatever. The ones who really suffer are those who feel powerless to stop. The secretaries, the doctors, the transports. We had a choir teacher, and he was in Vietnam. He didn't see fight, but he took bodies and wounded boys off of helicopters for years. And he was the deepest, truest case of, well, not the first, but he was definitely right up there, one of the most stringent cases of PTSD that I had ever seen. Any sound of a helicopter would pretty much make him twitch and cringe, and we would just have to wait for a few minutes until it was over. And this was in the 90s. So I digressed, but that's good because knowledge is power. And I'm reading this because there's some really interesting things that I had no idea, and you can't see a thing if you don't know it exists. And now that I've seen it, my life is richer for it, and I wish to share that with you. So, yeah, I gummed up there because they wrote in italics. Part of the fun of reading these old books, this is 1876, are just the sort of colloquialisms of print that they use. And it was suddenly in italics, and my brain wanted to read it with some weird accent, but it wasn't, and so I kind of stumbled all over myself. But back to the Inquisition. I've got a crystal in my eye. All right. Never has a prisoner of the Inquisition seen either the accusation against himself or any other. No one was ever permitted to know more of his own case than he could learn of it by the interrogations and accusations to which he was obliged to reply, and by the extracts from which the declarations of the witnesses, which were communicated to him, while not only their names were carefully concealed, and every circumstance relating to time, place, and person, by which he might obtain a clue to discover his denouncers. But even if the depositions contained anything favorable to the defense of the prisoner. The maxim on which this was founded is, that the accused ought not to occupy himself but in replying to the chief points of his accusation, and that it was the province of the judge afterwards to compare the answers that he had made with those which had been favorable to his acquittal. Philip Limborch and many more of veracity have erred in their histories from the ignorance of the method of conducting an inquisitorial trial. Those authors relied wholly on the accounts of prisoners who knew nothing of the groundwork of their own case, and the details of Emmerich, Paramo, Pegna, Carena, and some other inquisitors are too limited to yield the necessary information. These facts make me hope that I shall not transgress the bounds of propriety when I say that I only can give a true history of the Inquisition, as I only possess the materials necessary for the undertaking. I really love preamble historical smack talking. Anyway, I have read the most celebrated trials of the modern Inquisition, and the details given by me differ essentially from those of other historians, not excepting those of Limborch, who is the most exact of them. The trials of Don Carlos of Austria, Prince of Asturias, of Don Bartholomew of Carranza, Archbishop of Toledo, and of Anthony Perez, the first minister and secretary of Philip II, have been greatly illustrated in many important particulars. I have established the truth that which concerns the Emperor Charles V, Jeanne of Albret, Queen of Navarre, Henry IV, King of France, her son, and of Margaret of Bourbon, the sovereign heiress of Bar, her daughter, of Don James of Navarre, son of Don Carlos, Prince of Biana, surnamed the Infant of Tudela, of John Pic de Mirandola, of Don John of Austria, son of Philip IV, of Alexander Farnese, Duke of Parma, and grandson of Charles V, Don Philip of Aragon, son of the Emperor of Morocco, of Cesar Borgia, son of Pope Alexander VI, and relation to the King of Navarre, of Jean Albret, Duke of Valentinos, peer of France, of Don Peter Louis Borgia, last Grand Master of the Military Order of Montesa, and of many other princes against whom the Inquisition exercised its power. Follow the money. The lover of history will find the details of the trials of 7 archbishops, 20 bishops, and a great number of learned men among them, many of whom are the members of the Council of Trent, who were unfortunately suspected of entertaining or favoring the Lutheran doctrines. A lot of the Inquisition was acquisition. Money, power, power, money, wealth. Maybe, no, there's no Jesus. Although I did see a really cool crucifix dagger. It wasn't cool in the sense of what they did with it, but what they did with it was you kiss the dagger after professing yourself to Jesus and admitting your sins and saying, "He is my Savior," while you're on your knees in front of the Inquisitor. And while you're praying to him like this, he would have the crucifix and you would kiss it, and then he would slip the dagger out from underneath, and then you would stab it in your throat. I mean, it was gorgeous. It was gold and full of gems and all sorts of things. It was a work of art, of jewelry, but it was also a very well-worn, horrific, abominable weapon. It's what Jesus would have wanted. I'm pretty sure it was in the Bible there somewhere, that after your enemy goes down on their knees and begs for forgiveness, you shank him in the throat. I don't know. Just look in there. Lots of names. Okay, and the other thing was how many people of intelligence and academia, of writing, philosophers, artists, were taken in by the Inquisition. I knew and I expected Protestants, and I, of course, Europe hated, Jewish people, so yes, of course, the Jews. But the extent to which they persecuted, the academics, I was not prepared for. But on the other hand, I should have expected it. Look to all the other revolutions of purity given through time. I'm thinking of, the one in China and Stalin. They always go for the people who will object, the students, the thinkers, the artists. So too with the Spanish Inquisition. To this list I have added the suits instituted by the Holy Office against many saints and other personages held in reverence by the Church of Spain, and also of many literati persecuted by this tribunal. These for the sake of perspicuity I have divided into 2 classes. The first class comprises those learned theologians who were accused of Lutheranism, for having in their zeal corrected the text of Bibles already published, or Latin translations from the Greek and Hebrew editions. The second class consists of those learned men designated by the Holy Office under the title of false philosophers, and who were persecuted for having manifested a wish to destroy in Spain superstition and fanaticism. Think about that again. And who were persecuted for having manifested a wish to destroy in Spain superstition and fanaticism. This history will make known numberless attempts perpetrated by the inquisitors against magistrates who defended the rights of sovereign authority in opposition to the enterprises of the Holy Office and the Court of Rome, and which enables me to state the trials of many celebrated men and ministers who defended the prerogatives of the crown, and whose only crime were having published on the right of the crown according with the true principles of jurisprudence. They played all sides. They were their own gang of thugs. These trials will display the counselors of the Inquisition carrying their audacity to such a height as to deny that their temporal jurisdiction was derived from the concession of their sovereign, and actually prosecuting all the members of the Council of Castile as rash men suspected of heresy, for having made known and denounced to the king this system of usurpation. In addition to these intolerable acts will be found accounts of their assumption of superiority over viceroys and other great officers of state. I have also shown that these ministers of persecution have been the chief causes of the decline of literature, and almost the annihilators of nearly all that could enlighten the people by their ignorance, their blind submission to the monks who were qualifiers, and by persecuting the magistrates and the learned who were anxious to disseminate information. Knowledge is power. These monks were despicable scholastic theologians, too ignorant and prejudiced to be able to ascertain the truth between the doctrines of Luther and those of Roman Catholicism, and so condemned as Lutheran propositions incontestably true. They were idiots on a power trip. But they killed hundreds of thousands. Something to think about. The horrid conduct of this holy office, and he does it in italics. Oh, it's so salty. The horrid conduct of this holy office weakened the power and diminished the population of Spain by arresting the progress of arts, sciences, industry, and commerce, and by compelling multitudes of families to abandon the kingdom, by instigating the expulsion of the Jews and the Moors, and by immolating on its own flaming piles more than 300,000 victims. So replete with duplicity was the system of the Inquisitors General and the council of this holy office. Should take a drink every time he uses italics. I'll like wink or something like that. You might need it if you're going to read this book. And the council of this holy office, that if a papal bull was likely to circumscribe their power or check their vengeance, they refused to obey, and on the pretext of its being opposed to the laws of the kingdom and the orders of the Spanish government. By a similar proceeding, they evaded the ordinances of the king by alleging that papal bulls prevented them from obeying under pain of excommunication. So yeah, they were basically the bratty little kid who was like, Mama said, Daddy said, and did whatever the fuck they want. And the parents didn't really talk to each other and didn't discipline their child. And their child burned hundreds of thousands of people to death. Secrecy, the foe of truth and justice, was the soul of the tribunal of the Inquisition. It gave to it new life and vigor, sustained and strengthened its arbitrary power, and so emboldened it that it had the hardiest to arrest the highest and noblest in the land, and enabled it to deceive by concealing facts, popes, kings, viceroys, and all investigated with authority by their sovereign. This holy office, veiled by secrecy, unhesitatingly kept back, falsified, concealed, or forged the reports of trials when compelled to open their archives to popes and kings. The inquisitors constantly succeeded, by this detestable knavery, in concealing the truth, and facilitated their object by being careful not to number the reports. This was practiced to a great extent in the trials of the Archbishop of Toledo, of the Pronotary, and others. Facts prove beyond a doubt that the extirpation of Judaism was not the real cause, but the mere pretext. for the establishment of the Inquisition by Ferdinand V. The true motive was to carry on a vigorous system of confiscation among the Jews, and so to bring their riches into the hand of the government. Follow the money every goddamn time. Because people have hate, but people also have lazy. And if I'm going to go for hate versus lazy, lazy wins every fucking time. But if it's going to be hate versus lazy versus lots of money, lazy generally loses. So, remember that. Rock, paper, scissors. Sixtus IV sanctioned the measure to gain the point dearest to the court of Rome, an extent of domination. Charles V protected it from motives of policy, being convinced that it was the only means of preventing the heresy of Luther from penetrating deep into Spain. Philip II was actuated by superstition and tyranny to uphold it, and even extend its jurisdictions to the excise, and made the exporters of horses into France liable to seizure by the offices of the tribunal as persons suspected of heresy. So yeah, he was paranoid, could be inbreeding, who knows. Philip III, Philip IV, and Charles II pursued the same course, stimulated by similar fanaticism and imbecility and profit stream, when the reunion of Portugal to Spain led to the discovery of many Jews. Philip V maintained the Inquisition from considerations of mistaken policy inherited from Louis XIV, who made him believe that such rigor would ensure the tranquility of the kingdom, which was always in danger when many religions were tolerated. You know, you gotta kill some people to make it peaceful for everyone. Ferdinand VI and Charles III befriended this holy office because, I hope you're drinking or smoking, because they would not deviate from the course that their father had traced, and because the latter hated the Freemasons. Lastly, Charles IV supported the tribunal because the French Revolution seemed to justify a system of surveillance, and he found a firm support in the zeal of the Inquisitors General, always attentive to the preservation and extension of their power, as if the sovereign authority could find no other surer means of strengthening the throne than the terror inspired by an Inquisition. People with little insight, imagination, and value. Pretty much. Oh, this is all in italics, and anyway, we're not going to wink. But you can still drink. During the time I remained in London, I heard some Catholics affirm that the Inquisition was useful in Spain to preserve the Catholic faith, and that a similar establishment would have been useful in France. End of italics. These persons were deceived by believing that it was sufficient for people to be good Catholics not to have any fear of the Holy Office. They knew not that 9/10 of the prisoners were deemed guilty, though true to their faith, because the ignorance or malice of the denouncers prosecuted them for points of doctrine, which were not susceptible of heretical interpretation, but in the judgment of an illiterate monk is considered erudite by the world, because he is said to have studied the theology of the schools. It's the tyranny of stupid men. The Inquisition encouraged hypocrisy and punished those who either did not know how or would not assume the mask. This tribunal wrought no conversion. The Jews and the Moriscos, who were baptized without being truly converted, merely that they might remain in Spain, are examples which prove the truth of this assertion. The former perished on the pyres of the Inquisition. The latter crossed over into Africa with the Moors, as much Mohammedans as their ancestors were before they were baptized. I conclude with declaring that the contents of this history are original, and that I have drawn my facts with fidelity from the most authentic of sources, and might have greatly extended them. He then has a footnote, which is really just a continuation of the text, but, go to town. Following this asterisk, we see that the following fact shows that the inquisitors of our own days do not fall below the standard of those who followed the fanatic Torquemada. There's 4 asterisks, and I'm assuming that means that this was him, because they don't connect to anything else in the text, so we'll put it in the first person because why not? I was present when the Inquisition was thrown open in 1820 by the orders of the Court de Madrid. 21 prisoners were found in it, not one of whom knew the name of the city which he was. Some had been confined 3 years, some a longer period, and not one knew perfectly the nature of the crime of which he was accused. One of these prisoners had been condemned and was to have been suffered on the following day. His punishment was to be death by the pendulum. The method of thus destroying the victim is as follows. The condemned is fastened to a groove upon a table upon his back. Suspended above him is a pendulum, the edge of which is sharp, and it is so constructed as to become longer with every movement. The wretch sees this implement of destruction swinging to and fro above him, and every moment the keen edge approaching nearer and nearer. At length it cuts the skin of his nose, and gradually cuts on until life is extinct. It may be doubted if the Holy Office, in its mercy, ever invented a more humane and rapid method of exterminating heresy, or ensuring confiscation. This, let it be remembered, was a punishment of the secret tribunal A.D. 1820. He's being ironic. So that was just the opener, his little smack talk section. Chapter 1, History of the Inquisition. There's some really cool stuff in there, but this is a long take, so I will let it at that.